Hey everyone, today you have me, Tony from the Beehive team, and Nathan May. I'm gonna let Nathan introduce himself and kick this off. Excited to see you all here today, and I'm excited to not be in the producer seat. That's usually my role behind the scenes, but I'm glad to be front and center with you all. Nathan, how about you do a quick intro and we can jump into it?
Yeah, good stuff. Super excited to be back talking to folks. Today's topic, we'll cover a little bit about kind of me and more of the boring stuff in a second, but it's founder-led newsletters. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring up actually our materials and stuff. But a lot of people talk about like newsletters for media companies, newsletters if you're a creator. And I think there's a really under talked about like third reason why I think just about everybody should have some kind of newsletter. And that is if you are a founder and you want to use a newsletter to actually drive business for your existing company. All right, so before we go into that, super quick TLDR on us. So I run a company called The Feed Media. We work with B2B companies, media operators, generally people with email lists and newsletters to drive readers and convert those readers into revenue. Looks like a couple different things. We do subscriber growth generally on meta ads. We help out with sponsorships. We've done email marketing and sales flows. People who are trying to, let's say you have a newsletter, but you're trying to book calls using your newsletter, or you have digital product. Let's say you're trying to sell something on the back of your newsletter. We help with a lot of that back end LTV stuff as well. We work with a lot of cool folks, AI newsletters, beehiiv, lots of cool personal brands. And yeah, we've had a lot of fun, a little under a year old, but we have had a great time so far. We do a lot of these as well. So if this is your first time at one of these workshops, we have workshops already up on Beehiiv's YouTube channel around our paid ads playbook, around launching actual digital products off of your newsletter. And this one is going to cover actually what I call like the newsletter funnel. So you have some kind of company. How do you actually use a newsletter to drive business for that? This is going to be probably one of my favorite workshops that we always do because it's very close to home. This is like what I've done to grow the feed. So we've bootstrapped to about $1 million in ARR in about 10 and a half months using a newsletter. I've never spent a dollar on paid ads. I don't really have a personal brand. I mean, I've started posting on LinkedIn now, but most of our growth has come before that. And it's because of this newsletter. So newsletter growth memo, it's this private memo that I originally sent to clients, and now I send it to executives, founders in our industry. And I've found what I've learned about this is the way that you do this type of newsletter, the one I'm going to walk you through, and other companies do this too. So we're going to show you lots of examples, is really good for any kind of business, but particularly if you have a business. If you're a business that sells to other businesses, like an agency or any kind of B2B SaaS, professional services, I think that none of these companies use newsletters particularly well. And so I want to show you everything that I've done to help grow basically my company, and then things that I like that other people do that they've done to grow theirs with the newsletter as well. And so what we're going to cover are three things over the next, call it 35, 40 minutes. Number one is why every founder should have a newsletter. And then how do you actually use your newsletter? How do you do the content? So how do you position the newsletter and yourself in a way where you go from what I feel like most people who are selling products or services can be perceived as in B2B, which is like a pushy salesperson, to actually becoming a thought partner in the eyes and the mind of your ICP, your ideal customer or ideal client profile. And then number three, how do you actually grow the newsletter? If you're like me, when I started mine, which is I didn't want to run ads and I didn't have any big Twitter or LinkedIn personal brand to help build the newsletter as well. So we're going to answer all these things. I think the most important guiding principle, and we're going to talk about why newsletter first. People are asking the wrong question when they're building newsletters. And this is true even outside of, this is true in newsletter media companies. Everybody's so fixated on how many readers, how many people do you have? Because it's an addictive number to look at. And I think there's a far more important question, which is who is reading, right? Who's reading, not how many people are reading. And so on my newsletter is actually quite small. It's a little over 1,000 people, but it's the right people, right? Founders from all these companies, Industry Dive sold for 525 million. My buddy Rowan from The Rundown, 1440, Superhuman, The Gist, right? All these large newsletters, Beehiiv, right? Newsletter companies, ESPs, Chanel from Growth in Reverse, all read and have super, super high engagement. And those are the people that I want to be seeing my content. Those are people who it's fun for me to see my content. Some of them are clients, some of them are friends, some of them are none of the above, but this is the core group, right, who you want reading. And these companies as well. So all kinds of Average Joe, Morning Brew, right? But basically everybody who has a large, either 6 to 8 figure newsletter or is, let's say, an executive at a larger media company, most of those people are on my newsletter at this point in about a year. And that's what I think we've done this in sort of the media, the newsletter landscape. But I think anyone can do exactly what I've done in whatever your niche is. So I have a strong opinion about this, which is I like this. I think if you're a founder, I'll go as far to say as I think it's financially irresponsible for you not to have a newsletter. I think that should be the email is the number one thing that you can do to unlock more value in your business, to grow your business. And I'll tell you what I've noticed, which is there were problems that we had, especially in the beginning, that I feel nothing's ever completely solved, but have been really helped by having a founder-led or founder-written newsletter. So number one, what I realized is no matter how well you're known or how good your product or service is, 90% of your ICP, your ideal customer, ideal client profile, they're not going to be in the market to buy today, right? Like they may be with somebody else, or they may be thinking and planning. They may have just hired somebody new internally. They're figuring it out if they want to work with an agency or what some other kind of service. And so the question arises, well, what do you do in that case, right? Having the newsletter is one way for them to stay in touch with you so that when they are ready to buy, when they are interested, you're going to be the first person that they think of. The second thing that I feel like it's solved for our company is that in general, if you're trying to work with somebody, there's only kind of one shot that you have per quarter to really speak with them, right? If you're making an ask, which is, hey, I want to hop on a sales call, you're not going to do that once every 2 weeks, right? Max, you're going to talk to somebody probably once every 3 months. And so it's, what do you do? If you don't make the sale then, the window's over. And so I found like email has been an incredibly useful, high efficacy way to actually give people value, and then they reach out to you. Or it's much easier if you want to make the ask to get on calls with them and just jam and chat. And a lot of times it's not even necessarily a sales call, but when they are ready, they're the ones coming to you and asking to work with you. And then finally, I think the most important thing, so less around, are they ready to buy, or how likely do they think of you, or when can you talk to them? It's like, how are you actually perceived by the people who you want to work with? Do they view you as a vendor, like how he's here to make the sale? Or do they actually see, wow, this person's giving me so much value. I've learned so much that I can bring to my team from this person. Of course I'd want to work with them, right? There's no question. That's something that a newsletter can help support too. So who should have newsletters, and who is starting to do them at the company level, right? It's like B2B content marketing to actually drive sales. A lot of people are. So large VC-backed SaaS companies are doing this. So Rippling has a recent newsletter called Spend Setters. Motion has a newsletter around creative strategy called Thumbstop, which is really good. We actually have our team read this, and I'm thinking about becoming a Motion customer because of their newsletter. Carrie, which is a company by this guy who started a company called Teachable before this, has a newsletter called Independent Money for Carrie. And on the other side too, even non-VC backed businesses are starting to use newsletters to help drive sales. So there's an email marketing agency for e-commerce called WellCopy. They're doing $150,000 per month, and a newsletter is a big part of their funnel. The Ad Professor, who many of you might know on Twitter, is doing 7 figures, and a newsletter is part of how they convert people to the agency. Growth Spurt, this company Growth Assistant by my buddy Jesse, 17 million ARR. They're starting to use a newsletter because they see the value. So like everybody, I think people are starting to figure this out. Even Alex Lieberman now, a big part of his most recent company, which helps folks with B2B content marketing, is like, how do you actually stand up and successfully use a newsletter? So many people are converging on this point. And so if there's a question in your mind of, should I do this? I think the question is yes. So it's not a question of if, right? It's a question of like, how do you execute on this? A couple other quick things I want to talk about, benefits I found, and then we're going into the cool, how do you build one? What do you say, and how do you grow it? There's 3 principles that I like to think about here in terms of benefits of a newsletter, or rather a newsletter to a founder. So one is like, when you're seen more, you sell more, right? So just by virtue of speaking, of writing, of being in the inbox of other people, you're creating motion, right? Far more than somebody's going to see you on a social media platform. And so it becomes much easier for you to be top of mind when somebody is thinking about working with somebody else. The other one, number 2, I think it's better to be known well than well known. So very deep relationships, right, with fewer people, rather than soft relationships with many people. So I think newsletters, on average, much more value per reader, or I should say follower, if you will, than social media. And then number 3, another benefit I've found is just the act of writing. Not only is it fun, but it's helped me become a much clearer thinker for my team. Even workshops like this, actually just writing things down codifying them. We did a workshop on paid ads. And like, I just, anytime we onboard a new team member, I show them that presentation. So clearer writing, clear thinking. I think that's another valuable pillar. So super quickly, just some examples on this. See more, sell more. Again, newsletters, much better than social media for nurture. There's this article I love, and it's very true, but it's about the death of the follower. And the takeaway is basically on social media now, everything has become very content driven, right? So it's just because you have somebody who's following you does not necessarily mean that they're going to see your content anymore, right? It's now the content is the thing that drives all of the views. And very few people, call it 10, 20% of people are going to see any individual post that you're making. When you have a newsletter, 40, 50, our newsletters, I think about 60%, right? 60. So we're talking 3x in terms of does somebody actually see the content that I'm writing? That's before you even start thinking about how long form is that content, right? How deep is that content versus something that maybe they're just scrolling past. Known, not well known. I think Tyler actually is a great example of this. So Tyler has a newsletter that we happen to work with called Big Desk Energy. And he's really built what I call like mile deep relationships with investors, other founders. Next week, he's going on basically like a island getaway. He does these kind of group things a couple times a year with founder groups, and all of his applications come from the newsletter. Yeah, I think it's just been an incredible way. I think even when they did beehiiv did the community raise, right, that went out in the newsletter for beehiiv raise. So there's all these things when people very well, it becomes that much easier to engage with them. And I think that's a really valuable pillar of newsletters. And then this final one that I love, there's a guy called Alex Cooper who runs an agency called Ad Create. It's a creative agency for e-commerce brands. And his newsletter is super high value. So they did this issue, I think back in Black Friday, where they just walked through one of their clients, the Perfect Gene, and he's walking through how do we actually create amazing Black Friday creative for that company. And so he's doing a lot of what I call like showing, not telling. So you have people like he's showing videos they've made, actual ads they've made of squatting the jeans. He's talking about association with familiar experiences in the script. It feels like I'm wearing sweatpants because the jeans are very stretchy. So basically what he's doing is describing how do you create an effective ad like we do for an e-commerce brand. And that information is just free. That doubles one as nurture for people who may want to work with him, but it's also really good for the team, right? If his growth marketers, his creative strategists, he wants them thinking in this framework too. And so you publish once, right? But it's effective for more than one group of people. And that is when you start to get into activities in your business, of which email is one, that are high leverage activities, right? You do them once, they're evergreen, they help multiple people, they help drive business, they help your team. And so I find this to be, in terms of what should you have on your list of priorities, right, for growth and conversion, I think this is one of the highest things you can do, having a newsletter. Oh, and this last one, right? So when you provide value, you go from salesperson to thought partner. So this is Tim, he runs a company called 1440. They're one of the biggest newsletter brands. And one of the reasons why I've enjoyed writing my newsletters, I get really sweet messages from people that I really admire, like Tim saying things like, hey, I've sent this to our team. We're using this tactic that you showed us in XYZ ways. Hey, I'd love to catch up about this thing. Like it's just created all this serendipity. And for me, has made this less of an agency where we're trying to how do we get a bunch of market share and stuff to more of we have fun because we get to work with friends. We get to work with people that really care about. And so I think that's a less stated reason for newsletters that I found to be very nice. More stuff. So again, maybe expand on this a little bit more, but we get messages from people all the time. And running a business is hard. I work a lot, and I think with anything you're doing, you're investing a bunch of time into it. You constantly go through doubt. Am I doing the right things? Am I hiring the right people? Am I doing as much as I should be doing? And for me personally, getting messages like this help me feel like when I'm maybe not feeling it's my best day, that I'm on the right track. And I think mindset and that feeling is one of the most important things that you can keep in a business. And I think a newsletter also helps with that. Okay, that whole section, our first 15 minutes together, I hope has convinced you that the question is how, not if, on newsletter. Now I want to talk about how. What do you write about, right? And when should you launch your newsletter as a founder? Again, I was saying this a bit at the beginning. I think it's a misconception that you need some giant audience to start writing. You should just start. So I started my newsletter. So our agency started in February of 2024, but I started the newsletter in May. And I wrote the first edition to 236 people. These are people that I had met at conferences, either clients that had worked with me, people that I met on LinkedIn, a relatively small audience. But again, the answer was like press publish and then think about everything else after. Just start. There are two types of newsletters that I think work very well as a flywheel for your business. If I were doing this again, starting from zero, my preference, I think both of these are very effective, but I would do one of these two rather than other types of newsletters, like newsletters like a morning brew style or something like that. I like founder voice written newsletters. So if you see on the left-hand side, this is an excerpt for ours. I talk as if I'm speaking to you. Here's what we did this week. Here are the most interesting things that we found directly from the work that we're doing with some of the largest newsletter brands in the US. The other way of doing this is brand voice, right? So maybe it's not the founder who's writing it. Hampton, Rippling, Motion, other companies do it this way, where they have somebody on their content team or maybe a director of marketing who is writing the newsletter and sharing interesting things that are coming from the company, right? Podcasts they've done, things that have happened, your case studies of working with clients. I think either are fine. Both of these are good. What I would steer away from is doing curation-based newsletters where it's just news or links or outbound to other sources, right? You want the value to be coming from you, from your brand, not by linking out to other people, right? So how you choose to do the voice, I don't think there's no wrong answer, but in how you do the content, I would keep it similar to these things.
And Nathan, one question we get fairly often is around engagement stats. So optimizing for click rates and open rates and things like that. And I know sometimes people will want to have a lot of outbound links to optimize towards some of those metrics. Is that sort of the wrong way to think about it? How do you think about that?
So I think the question has to start with how are you monetizing? So when you think about most of the newsletters that are starting on beehiiv, most of the newsletters that we work with, they are monetizing because they have a digital product to sell. Let's say they're owned by a creator, right? Or they're owned by somebody who they want us, the newsletter is the product, right? So they want to have a media brand, they want to sell ads and sponsorships, right? So in that case, click rate is a really important indicator to your advertiser, right? Like if I'm advertising a newsletter, I want to know what the click rate is because that's how many clicks am I going to get? How many leads could I get? So there it's very important. Here, it's still important. What you want to focus on is this actually doing the thing that you want it to? Is it helping book you calls? So you may want to look at click-through rate, but you might want to think, are people clicking on my book a call link? Are people clicking on, let's say we've given away ad templates before, or like when we do sessions like this with beehiiv, we'll give away the deck, for instance, in the newsletter. Click rate on those things, high impact things that are going to be extremely valuable to our ICP that we've created and speak to the kind of work that we can do. Those are the types of clicks, the type of engagement that I like to think about and that I like to focus on. And so it's actually a very good question because I think it actually ties very nicely to this, which is cool. All right, so I write in brand voice or founder voice, maybe don't do curation. Okay, then what do I actually write? What actually physically goes into the newsletter? Think about your newsletter as like a series of Lego blocks, right? Content blocks. And you're deciding there's plenty of different stuff you could build, right? You don't want to do every sort of Lego that comes in the trunk, right, in there, but you just want to put a couple things together to have whatever your 500 to 1,000 word piece of content. And I have found these for like newsletters where the purpose is to like actually drive business for your existing company, these types of content blocks to be the most useful. Guest posts from other people, deep dives on a particular topic. We might do a deep dive on how we prefer to do ad creative specifically for newsletters based on our work with Tyler and Jesse Puggi and the Rundown. It's a very native piece of content to us, right? It's a deep dive on a popular topic, but it's only something that we can talk about because it's the work that we've done. And that's what kind of gives us a moat. Case studies. We did a launch with this guy, Jesse, a 15,000 person newsletter. We did about $270,000 of revenue in a little under 90 days. Excellent case study where we show somebody how you do it, but again, builds trust, the fact that we can pull off those kinds of launches. So you can see the rest here and we'll send this deck out to people afterwards, but tools and resources, tactics, event recaps I love as one. We'll go to events for newsletters and media companies. I'm always there taking notes. And the day after, I have a newsletter edition that goes out that recaps the most important things. So that even if one of you went to the event, it's, oh man, I'm really glad Nathan recapped this. I almost forgot about that thing. And if you didn't go, it's a really nice way to connect to that event and go, oh, awesome. Nathan's got me covered, right? He was thinking about the most important things for my business, as in the prospect, right? The potential customer's thinking. Nathan's thinking about my business, even if I'm not going to these events. A couple common topics. So Interviews are ones that I love. We actually don't do them, but a buddy of mine, Walter, runs a newsletter called Ask CMO. And so like Alex is a mutual friend, and Alex agreed to do an interview with them about creating B2B playbooks for content, which actually includes newsletters, which is a little meta. But again, why is this good? It's a really good excuse to meet your ideal customers. You just interview them. You're like, hey, we write to other peers. We'd love to have you on. And who's going to say no to that? It establishes you as an authority figure because people see Alex Lieberman's in this newsletter. This thing must be high value if they get to talk with Alex. And then it's also very difficult to replicate, right? You always want to be thinking about like things that you can do from your company, processes, just talking about the things you're already doing day to day. They are both an excellent source of content, but they're also content that other people can't recreate. They in and of themselves are moats. Case studies. So I referenced this one a couple of minutes ago, right? $250,000 launch, $270K for a 15,000 person newsletter. We gave away the secrets, right? And some people can go use that playbook. I hope they do. If they don't want to do it, if they want help, then we can work with them on that. So I think one thing I always keep in mind is give away the secrets, sell the execution. We're totally fine if people take our playbook and use that for those newsletters. We realize not everybody needs an agency. I'm cool with that. We just bet on the fact that maybe a couple people that have been helped will go, all right, I actually don't want to do this myself. I wouldn't have Nathan help me with that. That's how we think about it. Industry insights. So write about predictions, trends, benchmarks your ICP can't get anywhere else. And I'll just tell you what worked for me. I think all of these work, but just me personally, I was looking at some of our highest engagement rate editions, which plug beehiiv makes very easy to do. It took me like 5 seconds to grab this. And I was even learning a couple of days ago, oh, it's actually the industry insights and the tactics. These tend to be the things that get the highest open rates. They get the highest click-through rates. So you see stuff that's almost 70% open rates in some cases. A couple other sort of more miscellaneous recommendations for content. Using social proof. There's different ways to do this, but I like to talk about who's joining the newsletter. I think it helps other people see, they may know somebody who's joined, and if nothing else, week to week, they're seeing, other high value, large people in this industry are reading this thing. Well, I should certainly be reading it. You're very quietly reinforcing, at least the way we do our newsletter, that it's this premium thing that the biggest topic leaders read. I think that's a very important thing to try to do. As the thing that you're writing, always lead with the outcome. I remember I used to be a consultant, and they tell you in your training to be answer first. And lead with the outcome, answer first, whatever it is. There's an example I love of it, which is kind of a lot of people when they first got started out, they want to tell the story. They want to talk about all the tactics before getting to just what was the outcome, right? And so the version they always told me is if a house was burning on fire, right? When you're a junior consultant, the junior consultants come in and the way they describe that would be like, hey, the house is really hot. No, I left the stove on. I totally forgot. It's really smoky in the house and all these things. And as they're knocking on the door, and the answer would have just been, hey, the house is on fire. We need to leave. What's the thing we need to do? Why should we do that? And that's how I try to approach content, right? Okay, right away, $250,000 for a 15,000 person newsletter, right? That's over $15 per reader from just one sale. Cool, high value, I want to know more. And then immediately after this, I actually just talk about there's lots of things we did, but there are 3 things that we did in the newsletter that really helped drive this sale. Those are the only 3 things I focus on. That's the outcome and then the answer. What are the things that you should go and do? Open source your metrics. Right? Again, I think transparency is key. I love to back out. I just love to tell people like we have to be confidential sometimes about some things, but funnel metrics that we've done for clients, especially around launches. So it's very clear what the benchmarks are and people actually understand, not just somebody saying, oh, hey, this thing went really well. Here's actually what that looks like in the context of real numbers that you could think about and even apply to your own business. Same thing, hyper tactical. So this is for that same launch. But like one of the things that we put in the newsletter was like our exact what we call like our ICP cheat sheet. So we do all this research when we're doing ads or doing a launch with somebody on objections, on dream outcomes, on problems their audience is facing so that we can become very confident in the way that we write our copy such that we know it's speaking to them because we've talked to those readers or looked at what they open. And so they've told us the issues the newsletter solves for them or the issues they wish the newsletter was solving for them. And so we come up with this cheat sheet that's just a nice thing we can share out with the clients so it's clear to them who their ICP is. And so we put our example of that in the newsletter because I felt, all right, well, anybody else is doing a launch in the media business, they might like this, right? That might be helpful.
Quick question for you about a lot of what we talked about is dialed into the agency service model. Let's say you're serving an audience that is in CPG or like some sort of physical product or maybe some other less knowledge driven business? Like, how would you think about applying those same tactics differently?
I think if back to those like content blocks, like what I love about those is that they are industry agnostic. So I'll give you actually a real example. If you go look at the newsletter copy, Well Copy's newsletter, or Motion, which the other newsletter is Thumbstop, two of the examples I shared earlier, both of them actually serve consumer brands. Just slightly differently. So Wall Copy is an email marketing agency. So like anytime you're getting really well-designed emails from your favorite e-commerce brands, like that's what Wall Copy does. And Motion is more of a SaaS tool. If you took everything that beehiiv does for kind of for newsletters and you apply that to the e-com ad accounts, that's like philosophically the problem that Motion is going after. And so like Motion talks a lot about data analytics and amazing creative and benchmarks for creative. And it just so happens that the images they're showing you in the newsletter use their tools to emphasize that point. Copy is showing you what are the exact email automations you send for e-commerce companies? What are the designs? What does a great layout look like? Hey, have a couple template designs that we just use for a client. Just take them. We'll give you the Figma file. And it just so happens that they also provide that service. So I think SaaS, I think services, the thread is B2B, right? Because in B2B, you have very high LTV customers. And so it makes a lot of sense. You want to have a very high touch, direct relationship with as many of them as possible. But within B2B, professional services, agency, SaaS, there's a way to make newsletters work for all of these niches.
Understood. And then I guess that brings us to something like Tyler's newsletter of like Big Desk Energy, right? Like, how do you think about his playbook in some ways is so different where a lot of it's like there's no real thread that connects some of the issues in different cases. Like, how do you think about that where it's much more of like founder-led, off-the-cuff, genuine thoughts? What makes that work when it's in some ways opposite of what a lot of the principles we've talked about of like niching down and being consistent in that niche? What makes that work?
Yeah. The nice thing about why everybody's equity in beehiiv is going to be worth a lot is you guys have a very big TAM, right? So actually, beehiiv's TAM, to total addressable market, people who could benefit from having a newsletter are founders, it's creators, it's anybody who's making content on any of the major social media platforms. It's people who want to start a newsletter media because it's so large, right? I'm here too. Like I think everybody should have a newsletter. And so for that reason, I don't know that Tyler's main KPI is like, are we driving beehiiv signups using the newsletter? But if I'm him, I think there's probably two things that make the newsletter really valuable for him. One, he's had a lot of really cool founders that have signed up to that newsletter. And he's, like I said, I don't know where he's flying, but some island to go hang out with a bunch of people. He does these kind of 10 group vacations with folks a couple times a year. And like, that's super high value, right? To have other peers who are doing 8 figures, 9 figures, and just jam on business stuff. I know because they started out as investor letters, pretty much all of beehiiv's investors, and I'm sure a ton of people who would love to be investors in the next round read that newsletter. And so although Tyler isn't like talking about like why you should, sign up to the newsletter right now, it is very much tactics and playbooks for how he's grown beehiiv and an open sourcing of beehiiv's performance. And that's going to help for investment rounds. And I think he's gotten a lot of cool friends out of writing that newsletter.
Agreed.
One of the questions I get from folks who come and talk to us is, how do I get the right person on our newsletter? Especially in B2B because it's more niche, right? And so I want to give you a couple things that I think work. I'll give you stuff I do. I'll give you stuff other people do too, and what some of the trade-offs are. The first way to drive readers to your newsletter, if you have a founder-led newsletter, you convert your followers right into subscribers. I didn't have this option available to me, right? I didn't have a personal brand, but plenty of people do, or just post high value things that can turn social media folks into newsletter readers. And so there's slightly different playbooks for each platform. This is a little broad, right? But on LinkedIn, for instance, and on X, post thread call to action. So like you've said something that's very high value, right? In a thread, at the very last kind of card, can you actually push somebody to your newsletter to have a call to action for somebody to go sign up? And lead magnets. So things where you're giving away something of very high values at roughly in 10 minutes on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn. There's a post that will go live. Somebody from my team is going to publish it, and it will be this deck. And people will have to comment on the LinkedIn post if they would like to have access to the deck, and they're going to get a card page. And that card page is going to have them sign up to the newsletter. Usually I keep the newsletter private, but typically for these kind of things, I'll open it up for a little bit. Like, excellent way of converting people from social media followers into being on your newsletter. And you can take those same playbooks to X, the same playbooks to Instagram. So a couple examples of that. Auto DMs, really great tactics. So this guy is, I think, 19 or 20 years old and has an agency that does about $140,000, $150,000 a month in video editing. And anytime somebody follows him, he has a trigger-based direct message on Instagram that will basically send you an invitation to subscribe to his newsletter. This is the very first message in that flow, but if you were to keep chatting in that flow, you would get an invitation to the newsletter. Tyler does this as well, I think, for his Twitter and his LinkedIn. As people follow him, whether he's doing that automatically or somebody's doing it on his behalf, you'll get an invitation that's like, hey, this is for founders. I don't know if you're a founder or not, but you might like this newsletter. Would love it if you subscribed. Simple stuff like that. Post their call to actions, right? So this is my buddy Rowan. Rowan does these super viral threads on X about the latest AI news and AI tools, and he's always linking to the rundown after those threads. Featured links. This is one that I need to start using actually more on LinkedIn. I don't do it as much, but I have some friends who do it quite well. You can just feature things that are always on. So like lead magnets, viral content that you've done, things that by grabbing them, right? So for instance, Marvin runs a LinkedIn content agency, and he gives away these awesome value-focused things. Like you get a whole Notion, for instance, template or hub that will help you publish and come up with content ideas for LinkedIn. You just have to give your email, and then you can download that. So these are, again, ways to funnel people from social media into your newsletter. Okay. The next thing, paid ads. So what if you actually want to drive people straight to the newsletter from, let's say, Meta ads? I think this is probably the most scalable. Generally, you're paying $1 to $3 for leads. But to me, number 3, and this on the left-hand side, is the most important thing, which is that you want to qualify the leads. You don't, because you don't just want anybody to subscribe to your newsletter, right? Like Rippling, I'm sure wants a lot of subscribers, but there's only certain folks who can make a decision to use Rippling in their company, right? You're probably a director of HR or operations, or you're a founder at an earlier stage company where you have carte blanche, right? You have total autonomy over the types of tools that you use. So you should be using surveys, post sign-up surveys, and other things that help make sure that you're getting the right reader rather than just any reader onto your newsletter. And there are tons of companies that are starting to use ads for newsletters, and as in actual B2B newsletters to help drive leads. Rippling, Galactic Fed, Hampton, I think, has played with it on and on, or on and off, Sam Parr's company, et cetera, et cetera. This last one is my playbook. It's the one that I tend to like the most. It's like basically a Dream 100 outreach playbook. And so it's, if you know the people, or know of the people, if you can find them on LinkedIn, who would be excellent to work with for your business, you should just create a list of them on LinkedIn, number 1. Number 2, you should reach out to them. Number 3, you should provide like some kind of value-based invite to get them onto the newsletter. Right? It might be a lead magnet. It might be saying, hey, person X, Y, and Z, who you also know already read, and then you get them on the email newsletter and you just deliver value. A lot of the other stuff that I've been talking about. And I know it sounds like super simple, like anybody could do this, like it's not some magic bullet, but it's because it is. It's because it just works. So this is Sean Griffey. He started probably one of the largest newsletter media businesses of all time, Industry Dive. And this is me just cold messaging him, saying, I've got a private newsletter. I share growth and monetization tactics 2 times a month with media operators. 1440 reads, the rundown reads, Red Ventures, Dash, right? I share a couple other people, and then I asked him if he'd like to be on the newsletter, and he said yes. And he's been on the newsletter for, I don't know, 6 months, 7 months, something like that. Okay, last section, and then we'll open up to Q&A, please.
I know folks have talked about, or we've talked about, tools that people use to automate some of this cold outreach. I think some of it can border on being spammy or abusive. What is that line? Like, how much of this should be manual? How much of it can be outsourced to different tools? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't mind cold outreach. Like philosophically, like people are doing cold email and things. Here's what I'll say. What I would not do, because one, it's annoying, but beehiiv and ESPs will also ban you. You should not be doing this, is like actually going and scraping leads from Apollo or other databases and uploading people to your newsletter without their consent, without asking. That's technically legal if it's business emails. It's annoying. It's, I think, a little unethical. And there's a good chance your newsletter will get banned, frankly, if you do it. And people don't really like it. You should not do it. Any other way where somebody's actually opting in, they say, yes, I would like to be in the newsletter. To me, whether you do that manually or whether you automate it is up to you. We do it manually on LinkedIn and on X. On X, frankly, if I could, I would automate it. In fact, we're trying to look into how to automate it a little bit more. Yeah, that's how I think about that. Does that kind of answer a little bit, or is that helpful?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's all about the user's consent, which I think is the most important piece here. And just reiterating what you said, it's against our terms of service to do that. So do be careful. We don't want you to do that.
Yeah. The last thing I want to talk about is, okay, we've talked about what you write. We've talked about how you get people on the newsletter, right? But how do you turn readers into customers? Step one, I think the most important thing, and again, this is like so simple, but I think that's the great part. It's a very simple thing that not many people are doing and could do today. It's just not many people are doing it. Do interesting things, right? Because our audience right now should be founders, right? So you have a business already and you want to use a newsletter to help drive more business, right? So like your business is doing interesting things. If you have a good product, if it works, it's delivering value, you're doing interesting things. So just talk about those things that you're doing. Your work every day is the content. Now look back on your calendar. What are the questions that your customers, your clients, or potential customers asked you? What are the questions that your team asked you? What were amazing conversations that you had with people that were business development or just jamming with somebody else who's in your niche? What are the SOPs you put together? What's the value you just created for a client? What are the tactics you guys use to get to do that? All of that is the content, all of it. You just have to put it in the newsletter. It's not some giant amount of incremental work. It's just a little bit of actually curating those things. And actually, I look back on my calendar every single week. It makes me go, oh, I did get a couple of those questions. I got them 2 or 3 times. I should write about that. So here's a great example. This is a loose buddy of mine, Daniel Fazio, super smart guy, 27 years old. Just had his first $1 million month, $1 million in 1 month across 2 companies that he runs, Client Ascension and ListKit, which is a SaaS company. And one of the things that he talks about, he just sent in an email on January 15th, is like, how do you get to $1 million a month? What did I learn doing that? And he talks about each of the strategy, each of the things they did in their businesses, YouTube videos, emails, and ads, and how they ran those things during December, which was, again, their first $1 million month. And he walks you through those things. So super high value. And again, it's just a recap of their month 2 weeks later and the activities they were doing that sit behind that. Marvin. So Marvin runs a company called Notice. They help people write content on LinkedIn. And one really high value email of his that I love a lot is a 16-week roadmap for starting on LinkedIn, right? So it's like, what would I do if I were starting on LinkedIn from zero? And then Thumbstop, one last example, they just put together a report on high performing ads from analyzing $100 million of spend. So they help you visualize your ad spend and what creative's working. So they get to see all that data from the customers. And so they're just pulling up a lot of the insights of what ads they're seeing are working. beehiiv just did the same thing, right? They're seeing all the data behind the biggest newsletter companies in the United States. And so like they just published a 2025 report on the state of newsletters. So like leading with value, right? You're taking either the services you perform or the data that you have access to, and you're teasing out things that will make people better operators. That's the do interesting things part. And once you've done that, now you've provided value, right? A ton of value without anybody asking. Now, and only now, you get to make an ask. That's when you get to make an ask, right? You've given something first. So what are the 3 ways or a couple ways you could do that? I really like evergreen call to actions in like either the PS section. So just below you sign off in your email, you give you a PS if you want to work with us. So or the bottom bars of your newsletter that are always there just in case anybody needs them. I like email nurture. So automated email flows that you can set up easily in beehiiv that will wrap call to actions and useful case studies. And then good old fashioned emailing readers one-on-one. All right. So let's talk about a couple of these. This is like some of the email automation that we do. Right now, I just take a couple of my highest engagement newsletters and I send those first. There's really no call to actions in those emails. So they'd do $100 million brands care about newsletters. I have one that is 10 lessons from the newsletter conference back in last May. And I just send those out to people. And then toward the end of that drip sequence, I have some emails that I've written that there's still value in them. The generating $250,000 for a 15K person newsletter. It's just a case study, but we do have a couple links to like, hey, if you'd like to learn more about doing this, we'd love to talk to you. You should book a brainstorming session. Again, value first and then the ask. You can see that here, by the way. So this is the newsletter and like very nice comments from Andrew Warner and Jesse Puggi, who are super proud of this product. And Jesse put this up on Twitter, which is the reason I'm sharing it. But like they're texting internally like, oh man, I'm so proud of this thing. I can't wait for us to launch it. And then so you're seeing their reactions. And then I just have this call to action here, which is, hey, if you'd like to talk more, if you feel like we could be valuable, you should go and fill that out. And that is generally when I try to make ask. I'm showing you somebody was very happy with the work they did with us, right? They're texting internally. They've sent some wine. There's some internal Slack memos about how much they appreciate some of the work. And then I make the ask, then and only then.
Nathan, question for you about cadence. You mentioned one of the automations that you use. Like, how do you think about the right frequency to be setting up these automations for? Do you want to be in their inbox every day, every once a week? Like, how often do you want to be there?
I've seen it go both ways. So I don't have a strong opinion. I like, for instance, Alex Hermosi in his portfolio companies, he has what I think is like I forget his framework. I think it's like 3-7-30 or something. But basically, for the first like 2 weeks, you're getting, call it maybe 3 emails a week. And they're all industry insight. They're all value focused. And then as you get closer to days, call it 14 through 21, all the way up through 30, maybe you're doing 1 or 2 emails a week. I trust Alex. I mean, he's built a lot of incredibly large businesses. I'm sure that must work. I worry about emailing my list too much. Like we talk about, we email them twice a month with a regular newsletter, and then we have some automations. Like, it's my personal preference. I don't know that it works any better or any worse. We usually do maybe 2 emails a week from the nurture flow in the very beginning. And that sequence is not indefinite. It has an ending point. And then my usual emails, which are twice a month. And when we send those emails, by the way, so whether it's automated or whether it's the business as usual emails, we always have these kind of light, evergreen, always on call to action. So I'm like, hey, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I post a lot of content. If you have a question, you can reply. And by the way, like, we work with a lot of big media brands. And if you'd like to work with us, you can book a brainstorming session.
Makes sense.
This last one, emailing readers one-on-one, just ask. So this is Ellen. She runs The Gist. I was like, hey, I appreciate you reading my newsletter. And look, I don't know if we could be helpful to you. Here's some work we've done with some other folks pretty recently. Would you like to chat this Friday? And Ellen was like, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, there's nothing like super secret or that kind of hard about it, which is one of the reasons why I think everybody should be doing it. As a founder, right, you have very limited bandwidth. And so to have something that can be a huge multiplier on your business, which in reality it's not a gigantic sink of time every single week, to me is a no-brainer. I think everybody should be doing it. Cool. So that's what I've got. One quick thing. So if you'd like to get this deck, and if you'd like to be on the newsletter for the next, call it like, 24, 48 hours, where I shouldn't open up the newsletter and make it public. So if you're watching this YouTube video or if you're here live, you should come and join the newsletter. So you can do that. You can scan this like barcode thingy that I've done, or you can just go straight to my LinkedIn. These both just go to my LinkedIn. And a couple minutes ago, somebody from my team should have posted basically the deck on my LinkedIn. If you comment on that, you'll get added to the newsletter. And yeah, that's what we got. We can open up for Q&A, I think.
There were a few questions early on about how to think about list hygiene. And as you're growing this list, it might not resonate with everyone. How do you, for your own newsletter, how do you think about when you remove certain people? How do you try to re-engage them? Is that a big concern for you? Because from a lot of what you said, it seems like you want people who actually want to stick around.
Yeah. Even when you're inviting people on the list, you'd have to get people who fall off, right? Sometimes they unsubscribe. That's okay, right? The newsletter is not for everybody. I think there's nothing extremely different from kind of usual hygiene guidelines that I would give, which is, you should think about removing people who maybe haven't engaged in 30 to 90 days. If you're sending only once every 2 weeks like me, you might push to the very end of that. It might be 90 days, you haven't opened a single email, then okay, maybe I should just go ahead and proactively take you off. And you can set automations up around that. So yeah, nothing different there. Just the sending cadence may change whether you set that threshold at the 30-day, which would maybe be like daily, which I wouldn't recommend setting daily for this type of newsletter, all the way up to maybe 90 days.
Understood. That makes sense. We do something similar internally. Nate asks, can you talk more about balancing some of these different workflows? So I imagine it could get complicated if you have a welcome series set up and some retention series, and maybe you're also offering your agency services in a different automation. Like, how do you make sure that folks aren't being over messaged? Housekeeping best practices.
Yeah, I think it's how often you're emailing people. And I want to make sure I heard the question right, but is it basically how do you make sure you're not emailing people too much? Or is the question more, hey, I offer 5 different things. What do I even email about? Or is it more, hey, how do I find time?
I think it's a balance of both. I think it's a balance of both, actually. So if you want to hit both notes.
Yeah. I think the emailing cadence thing I said applies, I think once a week, once every 2 weeks for your you're going to sit down and write it. It's not going to be an automation. It's useful. And I wouldn't you don't have to worry about an automation from day one. Like I would just say if going from 0 to 1 is just like writing the newsletter to 1 or more people. That's the first step. And do that for a month and just get into a rhythm, get into a cadence. I found the things that help me write the newsletter when I get really busy. I'm constantly like, if something interesting happens on a call, or I think there's an interesting piece of client work that we're doing, I just add it to like my Apple Notes. And now I have a Notion thing that I actually just downloaded from Marvin, the example I showed you, and we'll put content ideas in there. But sometimes it's just in my notes because that's what's easy on my phone. And then usually on Sundays, I think every founder you should reflect on Sundays. What do you want to get out of your week, right? What's on your calendar? Is it the right stuff, right? And generally during that Sunday period is when I think about, oh, is there anything that happened in the prior week that would be interesting or useful to write about, that I should graduate from, oh, it's an idea, to, oh, I think this could be a newsletter topic. That's how I cadence out. And sometimes I'll batch it, is I'll write 3 or 4 newsletters at once. And then if I'm going through a particularly busy period, it helps manage that a little bit.
For sure. I think that was super thoughtful and applicable. Michelle asks questions about the one-to-one ask email where you reach out directly. I think you had highlighted that towards the end. Obviously, you don't want to abuse this. So do you reach out once per month and they don't respond? Do you then never reach out again? What is that? Like, how do you use that? How do you not abuse it?
Yeah, if somebody's like not reading the newsletter at all, I usually won't ask. What's nice, again, with beehiiv and like the event data and whatnot, like I can see somebody's average open rate, I can see their average click-through rate, and I can see if they opened my last email from a week ago. And so if that's all true, then I feel super comfortable emailing them. In terms of if they don't reply, I follow up, and this is more like running a B2B business thing versus newsletter best practices. But people, one thing, so Jesse Pucci is a good buddy, a mentor of mine. We built a agency well under the 8 figures, and it has multiple companies that each do 8 figures. An amazing B2B entrepreneur. And something that I've learned from him that I like, which is you should just get comfortable with the idea that you're not the most important part of somebody's day. People are very busy, and there are so many reasons why somebody has not answered your email besides your version of the story, which is like, I'm dumb, or I'm being annoying, or they don't want to talk to me. It's all these things about me and what I'm doing. Chances are it's not about you. Somebody, maybe they saw your email and they have a client call. Then the client calls over, they forgot about it, right? They have to pick their kid up from school. There's all these reasons why people don't reply. I was just I'd emailed Workweek 5 times and I had never gotten a response back. And Jay, the guy who leads marketing, was like, I think he was just busy. I think he just didn't see the emails. He reached out to me like 2 days ago. And we hopped on the phone, I think yesterday on Wednesday. So like the version in my head I was telling myself was actually not reality. I think he was super down to jam, right? It's just a matter of it.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely myself have a whole bunch of emails that I've been meaning to get back to and I haven't yet. So case in point. We have someone who asks, let's say you've already built so this is the opposite of what we're talking about, but let's say you have a newsletter full of high value prospects. How would you think about creating a digital product for that audience?
I think that, if you run a business like a B2B business, I think the best way to do it is give away as much as you can for free and then try to get people to work with whatever your core offer is, right? Especially in B2B services, they offer thousands of dollars a month. So I wouldn't like focus on a digital product in the middle. Now, if you consider yourself more of a creator, right? You want the newsletter to be the business, either through ads or through digital products. Yeah, I would recommend either starting with coaching for that, which is like the high LTV version for creators, or some type of low ticket, $20 to $60 product where you can get it out fast and test, are there buyers at all on this list? Is there sort of content market fit? Because both of those things are quick. You could ask in the next 10 days, you could figure out what you want your coaching program to look like and see if you could get 1 or 2 sales out of that. And we have another webinar that we did that's on the beehiiv YouTube of how you actually do one of those launches. So we did a 270,000 launch, 15,000 person newsletter, and we go through for an hour on like how we did all the research and all the basically everything that's behind that launch. And you should ask that question. Should watch that because I think it'd be nice.
Just finding that link so he can find the webinar we did about that. Actually seems to be all of our questions so far. Give one final call for questions, but if we don't get any, we can wrap it up. Yeah, I think a lot of great feedback in the chat. It's also great to see that folks have really stuck around. I think everyone minus 2 or 3 people has stayed all the way through. So lots of strong engagement from the crowd. So thank you all for that.
Amazing stuff. Thanks, guys. Yeah, if you need anything else, always feel free to reach out and grab the deck from the deck from LinkedIn. And yeah, appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Some housekeeping items. We'll be sharing the recording likely in a few weeks. We'll send that along to everyone who RSVP'd when it's ready. Other than that, we have a couple more events coming up. We actually have another event with Nathan at the start of March. You can find it on our virtual events page. That would be beehiiv.com/virtual-events. And that one will be covering AI tools and the ones that Nathan himself uses. So we hope to see you there as well.